Area 51, just the name, it sparks so many questions, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Alien encounters, shadowy government ops. It feels like it's all locked behind these layers of secrecy. For decades, it was basically legend, wasn't it? Officially acknowledged only, 2013?
That's right, 2013.
But you're here listening because you want to get past the myths, right? Understand what the declassified information actually reveals.
Exactly. And this deep dive into Area 51's history, its purpose. We're going to use recently declassified sources to really explore its crucial role in advanced aircraft development.
Okay.
And its surprising connection, maybe, to the early reports of UAP's unidentified aerial phenomena.
Right. UAPs. So to really get to the heart of this, we've looked at some pretty compelling material. We've got a National Geographic documentary which uncovers the CIA's covert ops there.
Yeah, that one's fascinating.
And another Nat Geo special looking into the origins of the UAP phenomenon itself. Plus, a BuzzFeed Unsolved documentary that takes a fresh look at Roswell, the enduring mystery.
And those sources, they give us a really rich mix of perspectives. You get the official government narrative, sure, but also firsthand accounts and, crucially, the historical context that shaped everything.
So our mission here is basically to distill the key insights.
Precisely. Give you a clear picture of what Area 51 really was and how its super secretive activities played a pretty big role in how the public came to view UFOs.
Okay, let's dive in then. Area 51. Where are we even talking about location-wise, and why so secret from day one?
We're out in the Nevada desert near Groom Lake. And the location itself, that was deliberate, chosen for isolation back in 1955.
Right.
And the secrecy initially.
Yeah.
Absolutely critical, because the base was set up by the CIA for a project codenamed Aquatone.
Aquatone.
Yeah, that was the code name for developing and testing the U-2 spy plane. Even the code name itself was part of keeping it all under wraps.
The U-2, that plane. It was almost like a glider, wasn't it?
Sure.
So iconic. What was the urgent need driving its creation?
Well, you have to remember the context. Mid-1950s, right in the thick of the Cold War. The Soviet Premier Khrushchev was very publicly boasting about their growing nuclear strength. And the U.S., existing reconnaissance aircraft were just too vulnerable. Soviet fighters, ground-to-air missiles, flying spy missions was getting incredibly dangerous.
So the U-2 was the answer. How did it, get around those risks?
Its main advantage was altitude, incredible altitude. It could fly around 70,000 feet.
70,000? That's what, 13 miles up?
About that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well beyond the reach of Soviet air defenses back then. Plus, it had long-range 3,000 miles or so and carried really advanced photo imaging tech. The whole idea was get pictures from inside the Soviet Union without anyone knowing.
That's a massive leap in capability. So what was it actually like there at this brand new, super secret base in the early days?
Pretty basic, actually. Initially, just a single 5,000-foot runway basically graded dirt on the lake bed. A few hangars, some storage, admin offices, and really simple trailer park-style housing for the people working there. But security. Incredibly tight from the get-go. Extensive background checks, secrecy oaths, covering every single aspect of the project.
And they needed a cover story, obviously. Couldn't just say, building a spy plane out here.
Right. The official explanation was weather observation missions. They said the high-flying U-2s were operating out of Watertown Strip, Nevada, conducting weather research. Sounded innocent enough.
Watertown Strip, okay. But there was a snag early on, wasn't there? Something unforeseen.
Yeah, pretty major one. Area 51 just happened to be downwind from the Nevada test site.
Where they were testing nuclear weapons.
Above-ground nuclear tests, yeah. So for over 2 years in the late 50s, the base had to be largely evacuated because of the radioactive fallout.
Wow, nuclear fallout shutting down your secret spy plane base. You almost couldn't make that up. Okay, so the U-2, groundbreaking stuff, but it wasn't invincible forever. I mean, Francis Gary Powers.
Exactly. May 1960, Powers U-2 gets shot down over the Soviet Union. That made it crystal clear. 70,000 feet wasn't a guaranteed shield anymore. Soviet missile tech was catching up.
So the next step. What was the next move in this high-stakes tech race?
Well, first the CIA tried Project Rainbow, an attempt to make the U-2 less visible to radar. They applied this radar-absorbent material, nicknamed wallpaper, to the outside.
Wallpaper. Did it work?
Not really. It added weight, which actually reduced the U-2's altitude performance, making it more vulnerable in some ways. So the focus shifted. They needed a successor, something designed with stealth, right from the drawing board.
And that led to?
Project non-terrestrial and the aircraft it produced. the A-12. The key takeaway here is the sheer audacity building a Mach 3 stealth plane using materials sourced partly from your main adversary. It just shows the extreme lengths they went to.
Stealth from the ground up. Okay, now this sounds like it really ratcheted up the secrecy. Tell me about OXCART and the A-12. How is it handled differently?
Oh, it was a whole different level. The classification was so high, documents weren't even marked classified.
Really?
Why not? The thinking was, unmarked papers wouldn't attract attention if they got misplaced. The mantra was just, it doesn't exist. Getting security clearance took months.
And the plane itself, what made the A-12 so advanced?
It was designed to fly even higher than the U-2, maybe 90,000 feet, and way faster speeds over Mach 3, faster than a speeding bullet, literally.
Wow.
But that speed generated immense heat, which meant they needed titanium for the airframe.
Titanium. Right, that's tough stuff to work with, and back then, not exactly easy to get hold of, was it?
Well, ironically, the best source at the time, the Soviet Union.
You're kidding.
Nope. So the CIA set up a network of front companies to secretly buy the titanium they needed directly for the Soviets.
Talk about a twist, buying metal from the enemy to build a spy plane to watch them.
Exactly. And Lockheed engineers, they also designed the A-12 with a reduced radar cross-section, making it harder to spot on radar.
How did they test that?
They used this special rig at Area 51, a 60-foot pylon. They called it the pole.
Yeah.
They stuck a full-scale model on top and spent 18 months blasting it with radar from all angles.
The pole almost sounds legendary. And the secrecy. Did everyone know what was going on?
Absolutely not. Information was incredibly compartmentalized. Engineers working on, say, heat management might know nothing about the radar signature stuff, and vice versa.
Wow.
Even the pilots, they called them drivers. They were given aliases taken from European gravestones, often didn't even know the specifics of their own missions.
It's almost hard to imagine that level of denial today, isn't it? With instant information everywhere. Really shows the extraordinary lengths they went to.
And getting the actual A-12 aircraft to Area 51 must have been a nightmare logistically, keeping it secret.
Oh, it was a huge operation. They transported them from Lockheed's Stump Works in Burbank, California. Huge unmarked boxes, like 105 feet long, 35 feet wide.
That's enormous.
They had to widen roads, cut down trees, take down roadside signs, all along the 300-mile route. And apparently, if curious people asked what was in the giant boxes, the security guys would joke, flying saucer.
A flying saucer cover story for a secret stealth plane. The irony. And I assume the base itself needed major upgrades for this new plane.
Yeah, definitely. A completely new runway, longer, stronger concrete, new hangars built specifically for the A-12. Area 51 was really changing from just a temporary outpost into a permanent, state-of-the-art R&D facility.
So Area 51 wasn't just about building our own cutting-edge planes. It was also about understanding what the other side had.
That's a really critical part of its history, yes.
Yeah.
It functioned as a technological laboratory, a place where captured or acquired enemy tech was taken apart, analyzed, exploited.
Okay.
Prime example, the Have Donut program. That was in 1968.
Have Donut. These code names are something else. What was that one about?
It involved a Soviet MiG-21 fighter jet. An Iraqi defector flew it to Israel, and then it was secretly shipped over to Area 51.
A real MiG-21.
The real deal. U.S. engineers and pilots went over every inch of that thing. Systems, components, flight characteristics, everything.
And what did they learn from tearing apart a MiG?
Well, the conclusion was kind of surprising. The problems U.S. pilots were having in dogfights over Vietnam. It wasn't necessarily that U.S. planes were inferior. It was more about the tactics and training of American pilots against MiGs.
Ah, so Area 51 then became a training ground, too, for developing new combat strategies.
Exactly right. Based on what they learned from Have Donut, Area 51 became the birthplace of a top-secret initiative to train U.S. fighter pilots how to beat MiGs.
Okay.
Which meant more expansion at the base, and the airspace above Groom Lake became permanently restricted. And that Have Donut program, it's credited with significantly improving the kill ratio for U.S. pilots in Vietnam.
That's a really tangible result, isn't it, coming out of all that secrecy and testing?
Definitely.
Okay, so we've covered high-altitude recon, getting inside enemy fighters. What about true stealth? The kind of tech that makes a plane almost invisible to radar.
Right. That brings us towards the late 1970s. Control of Area 51 shifted to the U.S. Air Force around 78, and that marked the arrival of Have Blue E.
Have Blue.
That was the prototype for the F-117 stealth fighter. And this thing was revolutionary. Flat, faceted design. It prioritized radar invisibility completely, even over supersonic speed.
The F-117. The Nighthawk. That incredibly weird-looking angular jet. Was its development just as secret?
Oh, absolutely. There's a story that during radar tests of a model on the pole, the radar operators who weren't in the know actually thought the model had fallen off.
Because they weren't getting any returns.
Exactly, zero radar signature. So the success of Heavy Blue EO led straight to the green light for producing the F-117, really ushered in the age of operational stealth.
But I understand there are maybe some downsides, some challenges with this new tech.
Yeah, there was some controversy later. Some people who worked on the F-117 program claimed that disposing of the radar-absorbing coatings, the materials used on the plane, caused serious health problems for them. It even got presidential attention at one point.
So you've got this incredibly secret base constantly pushing the limits of aviation, building planes that look like nothing anyone's ever seen. It feels almost inevitable this would start to connect with the public's fascination with UFOs, especially back in the 50s.
Precisely. You have these exotic, record-breaking flights happening out of this black site in the desert during the Cold War. At the same time, you've got this whole 1950s UFO culture taking off.
Why?
People were seeing things in the sky they couldn't explain. And this mysterious base, it became a natural magnet for speculation. So, yeah, with each amazing tech leap at Area 51, the secrecy wall got higher, which just fueled more public curiosity and probably misinterpretations.
And the military constantly denying any link between Area 51 and UFO sightings. That probably just fanned the flames, didn't it?
You'd think so. Which brings us inevitably to the big one, the foundational event in modern UFO lore, Roswell, 1947.
Wait, let's think about that environment, that secrecy, and how it intersects with Roswell.
Roswell is absolutely pivotal. That initial press release from the military, July 8th, 1947, announcing they'd recovered a flying saucer near Roswell Army Airfield. That hit like a bombshell. The local paper, the Roswell Daily Record, splashed it right across the front page.
A flying saucer. But then, almost immediately, the story changed.
Yeah, like the very next day, the Air Force walked it back, said, oh wait, no, it was just a weather balloon. They even held a press conference, showed off bits of what they claimed was the wreckage looked like foil and wood sticks with Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who'd actually handled the recovery initially.
Okay, but given the descriptions of weird materials that Marcel and others talked about later, is it really that simple? Just a weather balloon. Especially after they first said flying saucer.
It does seem a bit abrupt, doesn't it?
Okay.
And while the media frenzy died down, doubts lingered. Especially since the rancher who found the stuff, Mac Brazel, also seemed to backtrack on his initial story about how strange the debris was. But then, decades later, in 1978, the whole thing blew up again.
That was when UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed Jesse Marcel, right? The original intelligence officer, now retired.
Exactly. And what did Marcel say all those years later?
He was absolutely clear. He still believed the wreckage he recovered was definitely not a weather balloon. He described this metallic debris, incredibly light, but unbelievably strong, couldn't bend it, couldn't dent it, couldn't burn it. He talked about something like memory metal.
Memory metal?
Yeah, stuff that would return to its original shape. He insisted it was unlike anything he'd ever seen, and he'd handled plenty of aircraft wreckage.
That's a pretty direct contradiction to the official story. What about the other big part of the Roswell legend, the alleged alien bodies?
Right, those claims emerged a bit later. But they became central to the idea of a massive government cover-up. Eyewitnesses started talking about finding small, human-like bodies, but with big heads, strange features, near the crash site.
And the Air Force, what did they say about that?
Well, much later in a 1997 report, the Roswell Report, case closed. The Air Force put forward a, let's say, controversial explanation.
Which was?
They suggested these alien bodies were actually crash test dummies. Dummies used in high-altitude parachute tests in the mid-1950s. Part of something called Operation High Dive.
Wait, hang on. Roswell was 1947. Operation High Dive was the mid-1950s. How do dummies from the 50s explain bodies allegedly found years earlier?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a major inconsistency that critics jump on. The Air Force explanation basically argued that witness memories got confused, compressed over time.
Compressed.
Yeah, distorted recollections. They also said some dummies were damaged, which might explain weird size descriptions. Although the dummies were reportedly 6 feet tall, and the alleged bodies were always described as much smaller, like 4 feet or less.
Yeah, it does sound like a bit of a stretch trying to make those timelines and descriptions fit. Any other official explanations or interesting bits of evidence?
The Air Force also pointed to Project Mogul, remember, top-secret high-altitude balloons.
For spying on Soviet nuclear tests.
Right. Launched in 1947. These things were huge, over 650 feet long, carrying scientific gear. The military suggested that might be what Mac Brezel actually found, and it got misidentified as a UFO.
Okay, that's another possibility for the debris, at least. What about those persistent stories of weird materials? The memory metal stuff.
Oh, it wasn't just Marcel. Sergeant Earl Fulford, stationed at Roswell then, backed up the story of unusual material. Said you could crumple it into a ball and it would just spring back flat. Even a retired Brigadier General Arthur Exon, who worked on reverse engineering foreign tech, mentioned hearing about fragments from Roswell that were incredibly strong, couldn't be dented.
That's pretty compelling anecdotal stuff. And then there's the issue of the missing records.
Yes. A 1995 Air Force audit discovered something awkward. All the records from the Roswell Army airfield, specifically from January to October 1947, the exact time of the incident, they'd been destroyed.
Destroyed, conveniently.
Well, the report also noted the authorization for destroying them wasn't properly documented, which just adds another layer of suspicion for a lot of people.
And what about that photo, the famous one of General Ramey holding a memo right after the recovery? Has anything more come out about what that memo actually said?
Yeah, people have done enhanced analysis on the original photo negatives, trying to read the text. And some words and phrases seem to pop out. Things like urgent, victims, wreck, and a reference to a disc that needed to be shipped out by a B-29.
A disc. That fits the early accounts.
It does. And the memo also seems to suggest using weather balloons for, wait for it, public relations, which of course is exactly what happened.
Wow. So it really feels like Area 51's impact goes way beyond just building planes. Its existence, the secrecy, it seems tangled up with the whole UFO mystery, especially Roswell.
Absolutely. I mean, Area 51 was, and likely still is, crucial for developing all U.S. stealth tech, from the A-12 right through to modern drones, the Raptor. It's been this constantly evolving dynamic place, essential for national security, for staying ahead technologically.
And we've seen clear examples of its work paying off, right? Like the better kill ratios in Vietnam after Habdo-Nut, or the F-117 flying in Iraq with 0 losses. So presumably, even today, cutting-edge stuff is still happening behind those fences.
You have to assume so. The specific projects now, classified, obviously, but the need for that kind of secure, innovative test site for advanced aerospace tech, that hasn't gone away. It's still incredibly important.
So the core insight maybe is that Area 51's whole history is tied up with this relentless push for aviation breakthroughs, especially stealth, driven by the Cold War, by changing military needs.
Definitely.
But the intense secrecy around it all, while maybe necessary for security, it just inadvertently created the perfect storm for UFO speculation to explode. And Roswell remains the most, I guess, enduring and debated example of that connection.
And what's still so compelling, I think, is the ambiguity. Despite declassifications, despite official reports, there's still big questions hanging out there about those early sightings, those consistent eyewitness accounts from Roswell about weird materials, and just the implications of having a government facility operate in such deep secrecy for decades.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about that balance between national security, government transparency, and the public's right to know. Especially now, with all the renewed talk about UAPs, understanding this history of Area 51 feels, well, more relevant than ever. Makes you wonder, what other secrets might history eventually give up?